Generation that built the internet, survived the Cold War, raised themselves after school in empty houses, got laid off twice, and never once complained about it online because they never trusted the internet with their feelings in the first place. And somehow, we barely talk about them, Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, sandwiched between the boomers everyone resents and the millennials everyone analyzes. The generation that shows up in studies as a footnote, in pop culture as a punchline, and in your workplace as the person who quietly fixes everything while everyone else is posting about fixing things. Their psychology is probably the most misunderstood of any living generation, and the reasons why go all the way back to an empty house in 1978. Picture it. You're 8 years old. You come home from school, let yourself in with the key around your neck. Make your own snack, do your homework alone, and wait. No texts, no cameras, no way for anyone to check on you, just silence and the hum of a television. By 1984, a study published in the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry found that roughly 7 million children between ages 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. That wasn't neglect by today's standards. That was Tuesday. And that empty house did something to them. Not just made them self-reliant, it wired their brains differently. When parents finally came home, there was no processing your feelings, no gentle conversations about boundaries. You stepped out of line and you knew it immediately. Psychologists call this a high contingency environment. Actions and consequences were directly linked. No buffer, no negotiation. Your brain learned to anticipate outcomes in real time, which is why Gen X tends to think 3 steps ahead in ways that quietly baffle the people around them. Then came the lessons their parents taught without meaning to. Work hard, follow the rules, and life will reward you. Except Gen X watched their parents say that, and then watched the divorce rates spike through the 70s and 80s, watched loyal employees get handed pink slips when restructuring hit, watched the rules change mid-game with no apology and no explanation. So they didn't become cynical exactly. They became something more precise than that. Psychologists call it defensive pessimism. Gen X calls it paying attention. They built emotional armor early. Hope for the best, expect the rug. Not because they're broken, but because that expectation is what kept them functional every time the rug actually got pulled. That armor is also why you won't find them performing their lives on social media. This isn't technophobia. Gen X built the internet. It's something older than that. They grew up in a time when privacy was just the default state of being human. When you made a mistake at 15, maybe a handful of people knew, and eventually everyone forgot. There were no screenshots, no permanent record. The idea of broadcasting your life to strangers doesn't feel exciting to them. It feels like exposure. They learned early that the less people know about you, the safer you are. That lesson didn't go away just because everyone else forgot it. They turned irony into a coping mechanism so effective it became a personality. Laugh before it hurts, deflect before it lands, keep things at arm's length. And you can trace that directly to growing up under the shadow of the Cold War, where teachers ran nuclear drills like they were fire safety exercises, and the adults in charge simultaneously insisted everything was fine. When authority figures ask you to practice surviving the end of the world and then tell you not to worry about it, you develop a very particular relationship with sincerity. You learn to hold 2 contradictory ideas at once, and you learn to protect yourself with distance. But underneath that irony is a work ethic that's genuinely hard to explain to someone who didn't live it. Gen X doesn't talk about their work. They don't post about their hustle. They just show up and do it, shaped by jobs that barely exist anymore. Paper routes at 5 in the morning, bagging groceries, working fast food registers where you calculated change in your head when the machine went down. These weren't resume builders. A 12-year-old on a paper route was actually responsible for something. Real responsibility, no safety net. They watched their parents' generation get destroyed by corporate loyalty and decided they'd never make that mistake. They don't believe in companies, but they are ferociously loyal to their own competence. They can't control whether they'll be laid off. They can control whether they're the most capable person in the room when it happens. Here's the paradox at the center of Gen X psychology. They are simultaneously the most fiercely independent and the most quietly collaborative generation alive. They will never ask for help. They've been solving problems alone since they were 8 years old, and asking for help still feels like defeat. Research in the Journal of Adult Development confirms Gen Xers consistently report lower rates of seeking social support during stress, not because they lack people to ask, but because asking feels like losing. And yet, if you need them, they show up. No announcement, no post about it afterward. They formed tight bonds with friends out of necessity when parents weren't around, and that loyalty runs deep and silent. Their relationship with authority is just as layered. They don't respect titles, they respect competence. If you earned your position through actual skill, they will follow you anywhere. If you're a mediocre person with an impressive job title, they have no patience for you, and they won't pretend otherwise. They grew up watching Watergate, Iran-Contra, and the fumbled AIDS crisis. They have receipts on what incompetent authority looks like, and they've never forgotten economically. They've been hit in waves. The youngest Gen Zers walked out of college directly into the dot-com collapse. The oldest were hitting their professional stride when 2008 arrived and took everything. They've been financially traumatized repeatedly, systematically, and across different life stages, which is why so many of them have multiple income streams, not out of entrepreneurial ambition, but out of hard-coded survival logic. Nothing lasts. Plan accordingly. Before the internet, information had physical weight. You spent hours in a library working through a card catalog to find one book that might contain one answer. That effort changed how knowledge settled in the brain. Cognitive psychologists call it deeper encoding. Information that costs you something to obtain becomes more permanently integrated into memory. Gen X learned things slowly and kept them forever. They also learned to fix things with their hands, not as a hobby, as a necessity. When your bike chain slipped, you flipped it upside down and got grease under your fingernails until it worked again. That built something hard to name, a mechanical intuition, a belief that with enough patience and the right tools, you could master the physical world. Not everything needed an expert. Sometimes it just needed someone willing to figure it out. And now they're watching their own kids grow up under constant supervision, with every moment documented, with help always a search bar away. They gave their children the attention they never received. But quietly, some of them worry about what that's cost. Because in the Gen X worldview, struggle is how you build the thing inside yourself that holds when everything outside falls apart. Being visible means being vulnerable, and being dependent means being exposed. The truth is, Generation X may be the last group of people who genuinely know what it means to be alone with their thoughts, to be bored without a screen filling the silence, to solve a problem before Googling existed. They're not superior to other generations. They're just the product of a very specific and unrepeatable moment when the old world was collapsing and the new one hadn't loaded yet. They became the bridge, and bridges don't get monuments. They don't get documentaries or think pieces or generational branding campaigns. They just hold the weight in silence, in both directions, indefinitely, and not caring whether anyone notices. That might be the most Gen X thing of all. If this hits something real for you, subscribe. And if you want to support these deeper dives, the join button is right there. It genuinely means a lot.